All right. Good Sunday morning. So, yeah, as the world turns, pretty crazy. So, I've had some good questions here. I had a gentleman, Cosmere, ask me a doozy. I got up this morning and I looked at the comments, and Cosmere said, "Can you check and see if Trump is on the Epstein list?" And I thought, wow, that's a interesting one. And I looked at it, and I actually have it right here. I printed it out so I wouldn't have to screw around and look at screens. And I have to say, my first knee jerk response would probably be no, but there's a yes in there back a ways. And it's interesting because I was talking this morning about this. Trump apparently rode on Epstein's plane because his plane was broken way back, like 30, 40 years ago, from Palm Beach to New York. So he borrowed his plane, or he rode on his plane, or something like that. But I also have to say, Trump was involved in throwing him out of his club. I forget which club it was, but one of his golf clubs, because he was a pedophile, and he was also involved in helping the FBI as an informant to incarcerate or whatever they did to Epstein way back. I forget when it was. It was either in the 90s or early 2000s, might have been 2008 or something like that. He got indicted, and somehow he got out of the charges, the DA, and I'm sure everybody got their pockets stuffed or whatever they do in those kind of deals. But somehow they settled it. And I heard that Trump was involved in actually informing and getting Epstein to be prosecuted. So the chart kind of looks like that when I look at it. So, because everybody will be going, oh, he's supporting Trump, or he's MAGA, right? No, I'm just looking at the chart, and the question was asked, and I thought this was an interesting question. Because, that topic's so hot right now. Everybody's saying, why is Pam Bondi and, Donald Trump's appearing to sweep under the carpet, all the stuff going on with the Epstein list. And of course, Dan Bongino was reportedly wanting to resign because he's ticked off because all this happened. So clearly there's a lot going on here behind the scenes that we may not know about. And this chart kind of smacks of that. But in terms of Trump, the president is always the 10th house in an interrogation or prashna chart. And I kind of that he's not going to he'll be vindicated at some point somehow. And I don't understand why they're holding this back. It doesn't make sense because we heard, months ago, oh, this list is going to be coming out and, everybody and his brother's going to be implicated. Now all of a sudden it's like, forget about it. It's kind of like, Carlin used to say, yes, it's true. We lied to you and poured propaganda down your back. But now we just want to put this thing behind us and get on with our lives. And that's really kind of what it seems like almost. So there's definitely some mysterious stuff going on. And again, these types of charts that are exceedingly complex, where you've got a web of Gordian knot, stuff going on here, which is exactly what we've got. No question about it. I'm sure there's a lot more going on here that we don't know about. And there's some, I'm sure, people that would be implicated, but it is very mysterious why this has gotten swept under the table. And again, they just want to put this thing behind them and get on with the lies. But anyhow, yeah, I would tend to say, Cosmere, that Trump is probably got clean hands here. That's what I would say. Meaning, if he's implicated in any way, it was probably when he used his plane or borrowed the plane or got a ride on or something like that. People may know more about this than I do. I'm not a real follower of these kinds of things. But the chart tends to say there's definitely some kind of a reason this is being covered up. I really can't get into it at this depth in the podcast because I just got this chart here, like probably 45 minutes ago. So, but definitely, a very interesting scenario. I know I've seen throughout my life so much stuff swept under the table. that I used to do forensics work, and just a little bit that I saw, it's clearly a system where the elite do get away with a lot, and they tend to look the other way. They are above the law, and I've seen this 100 times where somebody at the top gets something and it's put on a shelf, and that's it. Forget about it. So, but I would tend to say I don't think Trump was involved in the sexual trafficking or pedophilia that would have been implicated in the Epstein list. So that's kind of the answer to that one. And that's not a simple one to answer because you've got a lot of things here going on. So, and furthermore, the moon is what we call void of course, which means nothing happens anyhow. So, no matter what, but my answer to this would be probably not implicated. And again, I got to go back to, he did actually get involved with the FBI to prosecute him. So anyways, and a lot of people, I've seen tons of comments coming through here. People are saying, yeah, Trump did not go to the island. And that's kind of what I would say by the interrogation. I don't think he ever went to the island. I don't think he was involved. In fact, it kind of looks like the opposite. Just like, history would say, he was involved in actually helping to prosecute him as he threw him out of his club. So that's kind of the answer to that one. It's all about power and money. A lot of people are saying that here. And there's no question about that, isn't it? Yeah, it's a coin-operated world, isn't it? It's he with the cash rules. So anyways, yeah. So I would tend to say, that's where I'd leave all that. And that was a very interesting question. And I hope I answered that, Cosmere, to your satisfaction. I would say, if you want to keep it simple, I don't think he's implicated. But it is mysterious why this list is being held back. Because again, it's not like they didn't say they had a list. They did. And now all of a sudden, well, forget about it. Look over here, right? So again, very typical. And isn't this appropriate with the astrology right now? I don't know about anybody else, but I'll tell you what, I've noticed the last day or two is kind of a weird feeling right now. And the reason why, Saturn stationed for the last couple of days, and it went retrograde last night. I think the exact time, Pacific time, and all these times I give you a specific time, was about 9:07 p.m. And I could feel it. It was really weird. I was driving the motorcycle through the canyons home, and I could just tell it was really a weird energy. And it's still kind of weird, and I'll tell you why. Because Saturn is eking retrograde really slowly. You got to remember, these outer planets, anything Jupiter out, particularly Saturn out, just goes exceedingly slow as they come to a station stop from Earth's perspective, and then retrograde back the other way. So Saturn is just literally eking backwards right now to a conjunction of Neptune, which is also retrograde. And what's interesting, it's in close association to this fixed star called Shiat, which again, Shiat, what's it connected to? Weather, crazy stuff, drowning, water, all these kinds of things. And we still got weather going on. That's crazy. We have all this choppy, weird, strange weather. And I hear Texas is getting pummeled even more now. They can't even continue the rescue efforts. So, there's nothing like Mother Nature. It's just so powerful. And what's interesting is Neptune and Saturn will actually come together. I wrote this down here. They're actually going to conjunct on the 16th, but they come within 12 minutes of arc. Now, what that means is there's 60 minutes per degree. So 12 minutes of arc is maybe a little over a 10th of degree or a sixth of degree in conjunction. So they don't exactly line up, but it's real close, and then they separate. Now, what's interesting is they come back together 2 more times. Why? Because Saturn will station, go direct, so will Neptune, and then they'll rejoin. So this is actually going to happen, I believe, 2 more times, and it's going to be in close association. This goes on all the way up until next year. So very powerful energy. And the confusing thing when you look at astronomy, which is really what I call it rather than astrology, astrology is kind of tied to us but it's really astronomy tied to us. It's the matrix of the solar system. We don't just have Saturn and Neptune doing what I just explained. We also have Uranus going right over the fixed star Alcyone, and that's going to continue right now up until the 15th, which, is just next week. So today's the 13th. That'll be on Tuesday. So we got a lot of powerful energy. So when Uranus hits Alcyone, and here I'll show you this. This is kind of cool. People often say, well, where is the Pleiades? Well, you can see this here is, if you want to locate it, this is kind of what we would call Orion's belt, right? And you can see way up here on the far upper right of the screen is the Pleiades. It's not a constellation, it's a star cluster. So what's powerful about this is you can see here, if I come in here, this is a thing by NASA, which you can see Alcyone is kind of right here in the center of the screen. So again, Uranus is going over Alcyone, and it's actually going to come back and hit it again this spring. So it's pretty interesting. The second hit will actually be in this October of this year. Uranus will come back again because of its retrogradation and direct motion, and it'll hit Alcyone at the end of October of this year, and then it's going to do it one final time up in May of 2026. So these things, go on. You got to remember, these outer planets are so slow, and they eke to a stop, which is called a station, and then they retrograde and go backwards. So this is really astronomy. And again, it's kind of interesting how the astronomers and astrologers absolutely don't seem to want to get in any kind of coalition here whatsoever. I know I've talked to a lot of astronomers, and I have great respect for science, but really the art of astrology, if you will, is extrapolating to events in the world as well as our lives in these cycles. And it's pretty interesting. Again, I was a skeptic of this stuff in the 70s until my mother came along and said, well, Jeffrey, you better check this out before you knock it. And of course I did. But anyways, what's important here, and I want to paint a bigger picture here. We have so much energy going on right now. And then we see this in the tensions. Look at the stuff going on with the ICE raids and the rebellion and the fighting and the arrests and so on and so forth. By the way, that arrest that happened at that pot farm is just miles from where we live. It's just north of here. And, again, the media came back with, oh, Trump is, horrible. They're taking all these, innocent people. Well, I don't know about that. Apparently, I don't know all the details, but like 300 people got arrested. And a lot of these kids, and there's some well over a dozen, I think up to like 16 kids were totally trafficked in there. This was child forced labor. And they're, I'm sure brought in by the cartels and all this stuff. And we never hear about that. But, last I checked, isn't that kind of like breaking the law? I've talked to so many clients over the years, they would be in some foreign country and they'd say, well, I got to leave because my visa's up. These people are trafficked in. They're doing, child slave labor in a pot farm, which God only knows what they're doing, probably mixing fentanyl in there too, brought in by the drug cartels. And, these aren't, it's not like Trump is playing, oh my God, I'm the king, No, this is a law that's been on the books forever. It's called owning a country and defending a country, I should say, or having a country and defending the laws. So yeah, this is all heating up, and the astrology shows it. And again, remember, I have been mentioning Mars, good old Mars, the planet of war, is going to conjunct Ketu right on the 21st of this month. So we've got tensions heating up, not to mention what's going on over in Ukraine and Russia. And of course, the pot is still boiling over in Iran. And there's a lot of worrying of terrorist attacks here, terrorist cells, so on and so forth. So definitely, a lot of tension is going on right now. Anything could happen. I hope I'm right on those interrogations, that we don't see any major, catastrophic earthquakes or underwater tsunamis happening in the Far East. I do think we're going to see earthquakes. We always do. But if I'm reading the chart right, we're not going to see a catastrophic earthquake over there that will wipe out the, Hawaiian Islands. And not to say that we won't get earthquakes, we always do. But the interesting thing is it looks like weather. I keep getting weather, weather, weather. And this is definitely what seems. And I also get a lot of tensions. There's going to be a lot of things happening. We're in a third quarter moon. That actually is right around the corner. That's going to happen here on next week. So it's actually going to happen on the 17th. So that'll be in the latter part of next week. But because today's the 13th, it's 4 days from now. And that adds to tension. What we just had right now is the moon just ducked back in to the Kalasarpa yoga. Now, people, I mentioned this a lot. I don't know why no one else is mentioning this, but all the planets, the inner seven, or I actually should say every single planet, including Uranus and Neptune, are behind what we call the eclipse points. The only one outside of it is Pluto, and also the moon will pop out every 2 weeks. Well, just ducked back in, creating the Kalasarpa yoga, which again always tends to bring weird, strange energies. So just to review, you got Neptune, again, and Saturn coming together by retrogradation. Real briefly, they separate. You've got the Mars heading towards the conjunction of K2. You've got Uranus conjuncting Alcyone for the first time, and then it's going to do it 2 more times, again, coming up in October, end of October, and next year. And then we've also got the Kalasarpa yoga, which is really intense. I mean, when you look at this is really, really intense. So again, every time Uranus sweeps over the Pleiades, and again, here's another look-see. You can see where that is. See, these are kind of the major stars in the cluster of the Pleiades. Every time this happens, we tend to, meaning Uranus goes over this star cluster, the world gets pretty insane. The last time, again, was World War II. Time before that was the Civil War. Time before that was the Revolutionary War. And that's just to mention a few. If we kept going back, I looked into Europe. There was all kinds of stuff going on, weird, problems and wars going on. And again, people say, well, but Uranus wasn't discovered. Well, who cares? Just because we didn't observe it doesn't mean it's not there. I remember reading in the physics books, right? If a tree falls in the wood, is there a sound and no one hears it? Well, of course, I mean, this is, it's again, human arrogance to say, well, if we didn't know about it, it didn't exist. Well, in your mind, it's kind of like Clint Eastwood said, we're all legends in our own minds, right? We got to step outside of where we're at and kind of look at, the reality of things. So this is a really dicey time right now. And again, we got a lot of dicey stuff going on. This whole thing with the BRICS nations and of course the tariffs and the USD is all a big thumb wrestling match. And again, I think the United States is going to win here. And the fact that Trump went over and did all that he did in the Middle East really is shoring up the petrodollar. The other thing that's huge, 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 huge is these tariffs. And again, people say, well, this is all political. No, it's really dovetailing exactly what we're seeing in the astrology. Again, I have to say, my opinion is literally this country fared better than I thought it would have with that Pluto return that had gone on so powerfully for the last 3-4 years. And it's been a real thing here. Somebody's asking me, will Trump live out his term? That's a good question. Let me see here once. I would tend to say yes. Let me just cast a chart on that one. There's going to be attempts on him. I'm actually looking at another computer up here that allows me to just cast charts. I would tend to say yes, though he's got to watch it. But I would tend to say yes. Yeah, he's beheld. He's not. The Lord of the Eighth will kill you, and he's not beheld by the Lord of the Eighth. So my take is yes, he probably will. There's going to be some abrupt changes out of the blue here as time goes into his latter part of his presidency. See, right now, that's an interesting question. I'm going to put something on the screen that is very, very interesting. here, let me share my screen here. And I've actually got Trump's chart. Now, to those of you who like him, that's great. You're going to enjoy this. To those of you who hate him, bear with me, right? It's not the end of the world. So let me just see here if I can get the computer. I call them computers because they are. This is Donald Trump's chart that I have on the screen right here. And you can see here something. There's something called a Chemdura yoga or Chemdrama yoga. And it just means that there's no planets on either side of the moon, which they call 12th and 2nd from the moon in Donald Trump's chart. Donald Trump was born during a Kalasarpa yoga. What's so unique about his chart is the Lord of his ascendant, the sun, is in the midheaven. And it's exceedingly strong because it is Lord of the ascendant in the midheaven, and it's aspected by the moon. So, it's anytime you have a planet that is opposite the moon, it changes the Chemdrama yoga. What it does is it tends to make people very dynamic. They go through changes in a very, you could say, roller coaster-like way. And this is exactly what's happened. What really makes Trump's chart so strong, and this is also what gets him in a lot of trouble, is Mars in the ascendant. Mars is what they call Yoga Karaka. Now, for anybody listening, these are weird terms that Vedic astrology uses. Yoga Karaka simply means it's the chart's indicator for Leo rising. Why? Because Mars rules the 9th and the 4th house, and it's in the ascendant. So that's not a strong Mars. That Mars is Popeye on spinach. He's also got a lot of other yogas here too. See, the moon is also, or I should say Jupiter is 11th from the moon in his 2nd house. I think he's made a few bucks in his lifetime, and they can say whatever they want about his father and all that, but he's made a lot of money. And that's because Jupiter's 11th from the moon. So in Vedic astrology, there's a lot of different things. The biggest thing about this question that the person just asked, and let me show you this right here. This Trump is in a Jupiter dosha. Now, for anybody who doesn't know what that means, Trump is in what we call a 16-year Jupiter dosha up until 2032, which is the better part of 7 years from now, a little over 7 years from now. And what's so important about that is, see, in 2027, Trump's going to hit the sub-period known as an antardosha of the sun, which is really, really powerful. And again, that's Lord of his ascendant in the 10th house. So the latter part of his presidency actually might even be stronger than the first part. And because he hits the sub-period of the sun. And again, the Jupiter dosha is in the 2nd house, and it's 11th from the moon. And this is quite powerful. He also won the presidency right as Jupiter was in his 10th house. It just moved into his 11th house. And next year, 2026, it will be in his 12th house. But in 2027, Jupiter is going to go. These are the transits on the outer wheel here, if you can see that. So Jupiter will go into his ascendant in 2027 when he hits the antardosha of the sun. Plain English, very likely to do very well. And probably, even though I know they're going to do everything they could do to take this guy out, they have been, trust me, the owners do not like him at all. It's actually kind of almost defying reality when you look at how hard the New One World Order has worked, set up, and infiltrated so many areas of the Western financial systems. They own it. I personally think, based on the astrology, that the United States is opening up this $150 trillion trust. And what that means in plain English is, and I think that's going to happen. I actually looked at this executive order. It's not executive order. It's actually a thing Congress had passed. And I believe the Supreme Court either has or is about to release this, which is going to open up this huge cache of, you could say, mineral rights that the United States has been sitting on, which is, again, rare earth minerals, gold, silver, on and on. And if 150 trillion would make the debt go away really, really fast. The other thing is these tariffs. You got to remember, Woodrow Wilson was the guy who signed in the Federal Reserve Act. And I can tell you what's so important about this is, and Trump has actually mentioned this. He said that literally the presidents before Wilson, right up to Taft, were using tariffs. Tariffs were the leveling playing field of keeping the income streams coming in to the government. And the government's like a big business, and it truly is. And this amount of money that's pouring in here, not only from businesses, but also with the tariffs. And again, it's not done. Right now he's talking about 30% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. I think some power plays are going on here. I still maintain we're going to see at some point in time Canada roll into the United States. And I know the prime minister and everybody said, but that's a hit that I've gotten. I've gotten questions on that. And I've also had friends who are psychics. They see the same thing. They see the North American Union ultimately forming. And it's very likely to come under the guise of the United States, even though that sounds crazy right now. But I think it's highly probable. And we'll see, what happens here. But that's my take. I think it's going that way. And again, if, my analysis of Trump's chart's right, the latter part of his presidency actually gets stronger than the first part. There's so much dissension going on right now. And again, the stuff we're seeing here in these blue states is crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. This is a tough situation right now when you got the borders flooded. Remember, I had mentioned the Cloward-Pliven strategy was overwhelm the public with bureaucracy, get unpayable amassed debt, national debt you can't pay back, and unfettered mass immigration. That sound familiar? I've mentioned this several times. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly like a playbook. And this playbook is still going on in California. They want it to go on in New York. It's still going on in Chicago. And it's just literally, Karen Bass now is handing out money to everybody, which, it's great to help people. But, they kind of are breaking the law if you look at it. So again, the real thing I think is happening here is we're going to see the floodgates open up. Now, I'm mentioning all this because this is what the astrology says. This is what I saw. Literally, I'm seeing primary directions, and those are very powerful, slow-moving aspects on the United States birth chart, and very positive right now. So, we got a lot of roller coaster ride here that's going to go on, but overall, I think it's an exceedingly positive time. I really do. And what we have to get through here is on the 28th of this month, this Kalasarpa Yoga is actually broken by Mars, which could bring even more intensity. We'll have to look at that more deeply, but it's very, very intense. So anyways, a lot of people are coming in here and mentioning, oh yeah, that's one thing here. Someone's mentioning the Leo rising at 28 degrees. Yeah. Trump has also got a fixed star, also an angelic force that's literally a king sitting on a golden throne. So, very interesting. You could see why he's had the tension in his life. He's been married a bunch of times, but he sure has a good relationship with his kids. But he's an abrasive guy. He's a warrior. That's what he is. That's the Mars in the ascendant and the Kalasarpa Yoga. If you look at all his yogas, even his Saturn and Venus in the 12th house, very powerful yogas for wealth, dissension, but leadership. So, I really have to say, very powerful times right now. And again, the astrology is showing it. By 2028, just to show you this again, the Uranus will have moved out of the Pleiades, and it's going to go over Aldebaran, which is we'll talk a lot about that coming up here. Aldebaran, that actually gets hit 3 times in 2028. And that is a very intense star. That's the nature of Mars. So this stuff never ends. When you really look at it, it never ends. Creation is the serpent of time. And we always find there's new things coming at us, positive and negative, but the positive or the divine always wins out, in my opinion. So I'm looking here at some of the questions, and the a lot of questions here, and a lot of unusual responses here to some of the stuff I've said. Um, yeah, so someone's mentioning here they go to Mexico every 2 years, and that it will be, and in 2 years they may not need to travel with a visa, so or a passport. I don't know if that's what they're saying, but yeah, yeah, I clearly think some very powerful things are going on, and that may be why these tariffs are being set at the levels they're setting. It's putting the pressure on them. So, and again, when you hear that Canada is subsidized by 250 billion a year, and that's a guesstimate. No one knows. It could be more. And it's a very interesting situation because I know a lot of Canadians, a lot of great people up there, but the government sure seems to be a lot different than the people I talk to in Canada, because a lot of these people would love to escape from Alcatraz, so to speak, and have more freedoms. And I think COVID really put the the focus on that one, no doubt about that. So yeah, a lot of questions here. I'm just trying to catch up with some of them here. I can't stay real long this morning, but the main thing I want to show here is that the astrology really shows, or astronomy, if you will, a lot of energy is coming up. By the way, we got Mercury going retrograde, coming right up here on the 17th. So that's really powerful. And everybody knows what Mercury retrogrades mean. So you got all these planets, Neptune, Saturn, Mercury retrograde, and you got the Mars again. Again, what is it? Mercury retrogrades literally, or stations 2 days before, right when Alcyone's hitting or being hit by this Uranus. So it's really powerful. So we'll see what happens here. So yeah, I have to say, the world has always been insane, no question about that. And I loved opening today with this whole situation with the Epstein thing, because clearly something is going on about that. I always like to say, and that's clearly our media has been a propaganda machine. And if you look at what's going on, it is definitely curated news. In fact, you watch your media people, you can see their eyes following the teleprompter right over the lens of the camera. If you ever look at a teleprompter, the text goes right over the center of the lens. So you can't really see them looking anywhere else or reading anything. It's right on there. And that a lot of this stuff is curated. And there's been a lot of lore in the past that some of these news channels are literally government operatives. They're literally funded by it, and a lot of secret stuff. Again, I go back to John Radcliffe, interesting guy. And I think we have so many compartmentalizations of government going on. It's literally a psyops against the American people. There's no doubt. So it's like I say, believe nothing of what you see, and a portion of what you hear, and you might be somewhat closer to the truth after you evaluate whatever they tell you. So anyways, I think, a lot of people are coming back here with saying that they feel the country is heading in a new and much better direction. I can't wait for 226, because then Gruesom's gone. I'm sorry, Newsom. I mean, that guy, he'll smile us right into communism. And it's really kind of saddening what's happening here in California. So far, the fuel prices have not gone up. I fill up every day. In fact, they went down 10 cents. Maybe he's really trying to get elected. I don't know. But, so far, the fuel prices have not soared here, because if they shut down these refineries, and granted, I believe there's free energy. I've actually seen it. In fact, I think hydrogen, even though I've heard people say, oh, hydrogen can't happen. Yes, it can. I actually rode in a 350 Chevy back in the 90s, up the Grapevine. A friend of mine had perfected a diehard battery, put a copper and an aluminum post in there. He had to mist it down because it was so flammable. It would burn holes in the pistons of the truck. And he blew up the 5 doing 80 miles an hour. And I can tell you hydrogen is very viable. And I've heard about this since the 60s that there's a company called Billings Energy Corporation, different than the one here, but that we hear about now. But it's another Billings that went out of business. And they had perfected hydrogen so good, you could pour water in a tank, it would disseminate it and mist it into the input of the fuel injectors or carburetors. Of course, back then it was carburetors, perfectly. And they got shut down like that. Oil is the lifeblood of this economy right now. And if you shut it off, you look at the tax bases, all the income, etc. It's really hard to get out of that genre without damaging the economy. So I think we'll get there someday. The future is never going to stop coming at us, but we're not there yet. And right now, again, I always use the analogy, we're like a jackknife semi. There's only one way out: pull forward and get this thing running, get this engine back up and running again, because we have clearly had a new one world order takeover and destructive force on us that I'm actually surprised we're still standing as well as we are. And the astrology shows we're going to come up out of this. I think there's going to be huge investment opportunities if you hit the right places, not only in crypto, but also in the precious minerals, AI technologies, all that. There always is, but we're on the edge of a technology boom like we've never seen before. I'm hearing so much stuff that's coming through in terms of acceleration in AI. It's never going to stop, and I hope that whole thing is kept to where it doesn't, destroy humanity like a Terminator movie, because it certainly could. So we'll see what happens here. So anyways, I'm just keeping up with the comments here. I'm very limited on time this morning. And, a lot of people are coming through with a lot of questions here. Yeah, somebody's mentioning here, Rita Barnum this morning said how much dough has already rolled in from the tariffs. That's right. Tariffs were the secret. And I have to say, Woodrow Wilson is the guy who rubber stamped the Federal Reserve Act. And Biden and Wilson, I always draw a comparison. There's a lot of similarities between them. They both kind of got wiped out and the wife took over, or at least they say that she did, or the handlers took over. And that whole situation, Wilson might have been the entrance of the control. Biden in this Trump situation may be the exit out of it. And I tell you, I think it was Thomas Jefferson or Washington. They said, if anyone ever gets to print our money, they will be more dangerous than any standing army. And boy, they were right about that. And you look at where we've been here for the last 100 and almost 13 or 14 years. Pretty amazing, pretty amazing. And next year we have the 250-year anniversary of this country. Well, that's just close to the synodic cycle, which is a fancy word for the time it takes Pluto to go around the solar system. It's not exactly 250, but it's about 248 to 250. Well, we just had the Pluto return between the 247th and 248th year. And look what's happened. And these things don't just happen on the days. The forces are in play much, much before. So, and again, nothing happens in a vacuum. And that's what's interesting about looking at the astrology, is how these things line up in a mundane way. In other words, someone did this or that, or someone did some action, but it literally lined up with the forces that were in play that perfect when these astrological energies meet. Very interesting. Since I'm mentioning the founding forefathers, one guy that was really interesting was Benjamin Franklin. He literally had these almanacs. He went under Poor Richard's almanac, and England and the Western countries were full of this stuff, where they would literally have astrological forecasts that are put out, which many astrologers do today. I don't do that as much as other astrologers. I'm too busy with clients, and that's why I got to go this morning. I actually have a client that I have to do because I moved another one in order to do some other things last week. So, yeah. But anyways, thanks everybody for joining me. And remember, it's all a big picture.
Time for this one to come home.
So always, just keep looking at your reality with a more objective viewpoint. So many blessings to everybody, and we'll see you on Wednesday. I'll hopefully have more time on Wednesday.